But hats off still to Portland for a very good season.
Yeah, and also hats off to Zach Collins, who had a really great playoffs, and he gives them some options. I mean, they made the move to get Collins. It didn't look great when Donovan Mitchell played the way he did, but, at the same time, Donovan Mitchell was never really going to be able to get the time to play on this team anyway, so it's not as if they could have drafted him. But the way that Collins has played gives them options now. They can either keep him and build around him as a young big man, or they get the opportunity to potentially trade him, and maybe he helps them get a wing. But, Jason, I think we're going to move on from that and then look a little bit forward. So we talked a little bit about what's going on with the Warriors as far as this series, and we even touched a little on the finals preview, but I think two of the big storylines are the injuries for their team. Obviously, Iguodala misses Game 4. I think by all accounts he's going to be fine. He'll be back. I don't think that there's a big concern that he's going to miss any time in the finals, but still, they need him. But the big injuries, Jason, are Kevin Durant, who, as we mentioned, we expect him back. I mean, he's going to be critical. But the other guy who's maybe the wild card, Jason, is DeMarcus Cousins.
Yeah, he's clearly their X factor, and he's been working behind the scenes according to multiple reports. He's been getting in court work every single day. He has hopes of playing in the NBA Finals. Steve Kerr remaining a little bit coy on it, but I don't know. I mean, I think no matter who they play, whether it's the Bucks or the Raptors, Cousins will help offensively. I think defensively he's a little bit of a liability, but you know what? If you could put him in the middle with their floor spacing, they could be even more dangerous than they already are. So it'll be very interesting to see if Cousins is able to make an appearance in the NBA Finals. We all know Kevin Durant's playing. We all know Andre Iguodala will be out there. He's played through injuries for his entire career. If you get DeMarcus Cousins out there, after everybody deemed that he'd be out for the rest of the postseason, that would be a very impressive comeback because Cousins is playing for his NBA career. Another year-ending injury like that, and he may never be that max player again. I mean, he took a $5 million deal for 1 year to play in Golden State. He's not that $150 million player that everyone thought he would be early in his career. So if he goes out and he has a decent to good performance in the NBA Finals, that's the only way a team's going to pay him anywhere close to the money he's going to command this summer.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the funny thing is he has a lot to prove in these playoffs because I feel like when you look back, you actually see that the Warriors played better without him. When he went down, it seemed like they got back to their real identity, which is pushing the ball and moving. And with him around, it was hard to play that way. And defensively, as you mentioned, he is a tough sell defensively. Against either of these teams that they play in the NBA Finals, he is going to give that team a place to attack on offense. They will try to switch him on to smaller guys and defend in space, and that's just not his game. So I'm curious. I mean, my thought on this is that I actually think he might be a net negative for this Warriors team, which is amazing given his stature in the league. But I think defensively, he's just not capable of really defending in space. And I'm not sure that there's, the right matchup. I mean, I suppose Marc Gasol may be the type of guy who he could kind of stick on. But he'd have to stay out to the three-point line on him, and obviously Brook Lopez the same. And meanwhile, on the other end, as good as he is offensively, his shooting ability is not good enough that I think that these teams are going to really scramble their defense to account for him. And I think that's a problem for the Warriors. I think they're almost better off with a guy like an Iguodala out there who can really move the ball, who you can't switch a big guy onto because he can get into the lane. I think that that's going to be tough. And yet, Jason, you really hit the nail on the head when you said this is his time to prove himself. If he does have a good finals, this could lead to a huge payday for him because ultimately if he proves that he can play against these teams at the highest level, that's going to make him a really sought-after commodity. And you have to imagine that that's part of his thinking at this point because if he can show it on the NBA Finals stage, there are going to be a lot of suitors waiting for his services come the offseason.
Well, we all know he won't be back with Golden State. He signed with them because that's his best chance at a championship ring. Whether or not he plays in the finals or not, and the Warriors win, he's getting a ring, but I think he's going to want to play in the finals to at least show that he contributed. But I'm going to put an emphasis on the word contribute, because if he can play anywhere from 12 to 16 minutes a game, 10 points, 6 rebounds, and then sit down, put Andre Iguodala in, have that modern-day death lineup, I think that's the best the Warriors could ask for, because some team will probably still pay him. I see him potentially teaming up in Dallas with Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic. But either way, congratulations to the Golden State Warriors. 5 straight NBA Finals appearances. Hasn't been done since the Bill Russell-led Boston Celtics in the 60s. And obviously, hats off for the Trailblazers on one hell of a season. But I think we have to switch gears here. The Eastern Conference Finals are heating up. The West was a sweep, but the East is going at least 6 games. Milwaukee wins the first 2 games of that series. They go into Toronto, and the Raptors hold serve. They win Game 3 very narrowly, Ben. But Tuesday night, while we were recording the first edition of this podcast, they absolutely dominated the Bucks en route to the largest margin of victory in the series, and the Raptors went ahead and evened this up at 2 games apiece.
Yeah, very impressive, especially with the down night from Kawhi. Kawhi wasn't his normal self, and I mean, that's going to bring some questions that we're going to have to talk about. But, you know, again, kudos to the Raptors who managed to step up. Their much maligned bench really, really was the story of the night in many ways. Powell stepped up in a big way. They needed that from them. The bench has been one of the really troublesome points of this team. And for Powell, Ibaka, and Van Vliet to all step up, that was huge for the Raptors. And Jason, when you look at the plus-minus, it tells the story. Norman Powell was a plus 29 in 32 minutes, Jason. Serge Ibaka, plus 24 in 24 minutes. And Fred Van Vliet, who has had an incredibly difficult postseason, has not played well, was plus 25 in 25 minutes, hit 3 threes, and those guys really propelled them to this victory. And it bought them a little time for Kawhi Leonard to potentially heal up. He did play 34 minutes, only had 19 points, but obviously he didn't look entirely like himself, but played well. I have more on him in a minute, but the guy who really stepped up in his, let's say, his absence was Kyle Lowry, who had 25 points, was aggressive with his 10 free throws. He was 10 for 10 at the line. I mean, they needed that game from Kyle Lowry, Jason, and what do you feel like this means for the series going forward?
It's huge for the Raptors because Kawhi was their savior in Game 3. He's the one that kept them from the edge of elimination. So it's nice to see his teammates step up and keep him in check because the Toronto Raptors doing everything they can to keep Kawhi Leonard in the city, in the north, as we should say. They came up with this, I heard this on the broadcast last night. They came up with this Kawhi and Dine feature where 50 restaurants have signed on and said Kawhi Leonard could eat here for free for life if he re-signs in Toronto. An auto detail shop, a law firm, all said your services are free if you stay in Toronto. They are doing everything they can to keep Kawhi, Ben. However, Kawhi knows he cannot be a one-man band up there. So to answer your question, it is very nice to see guys like Kyle Lowry step up, like Fred Van Vliet to step up, Norman Powell. Siakam's kind of been that second option for much of this postseason, but it was good to see the other rotational role players on this roster step up to the plate. Kawhi did not look like his full self last night, but it didn't matter because the Raptors, from all ends of the floor, dominated Milwaukee. And now it's even going back to Wisconsin for Game 5. So huge to see his teammates step up, definitely.
Yeah, and without further ado, I'm going to end the speculation, Jason, because Kawhi Leonard is my hero of the week. He has been a man in all of these series. He has been the one constant for this team who's had ups and downs, as you mentioned, from really all the other players. He's been their one consistent guy. In this game, as we mentioned, he wasn't his normal self, but the only games where he hasn't been spectacular have been games where, the Raptors pretty much had the game in hand. So Tuesday night's game, he only had 19 points. And in the first round, in a 15-point win against the Magic, he only had 16. But I think that speaks to the fact that he knows this team needs him, and he steps up when they need him the most. Some of the narrow wins that they've had, most notably Game 7 against the Sixers, he's just been the guy. He's taken the load on his shoulders, and he's propelled them to victory. On Sunday night's game, he played 52 minutes, scored 36 points, including incredible defense that led to some transition looks. They have struggled mightily against the Bucks in the half court, and having that defense that can turn an offensive possession for the Bucks into offense for the Raptors has been huge. And it's also been incredible to see him just feast on this team and get to the line. He has shot 10, and 13 free throws respectively in the first 3 games, Jason. And you mentioned the fact that, yes, some of those guys on the bench, they stepped up this game, but they have not been there for most of the playoffs. Van Vliet has really struggled at points in the playoffs. And I think this game saw the worm turn, as they say, Jason, because in the previous games, it was the Raptor bench that struggled and the Raptor supporting cast. And then, Jason, on Tuesday night, we watched the reverse happen. The Bucks, they had some of their guys continue to struggle. And we've seen this movie before, right, Jason? I mean, Eric Bledsoe has had a really tough postseason. Chris Middleton finally got it together. But if they don't get more from some of their supporting cast around Giannis, it's going to be really tough for them to win this series now because the pressure shifts back to them as the series goes back to Wisconsin.
I'm just going to say one thing on you, Hero. I thought it was an excellent choice. Are you and Flo going to open up your kitchen to Kawhi Leonard whenever he's in Pittsburgh and have him eat for free for life if he re-signs in Toronto?
I think we just have to, right, Jason? I mean, what a deal, by the way. I mean, I don't know if this speaks more to his stature or the generosity of Toronto, but my goodness, that sounds like a great deal. I would love to have the Ben Wine and Dine feature here in Pittsburgh. That's for sure.
No, I'm saying whenever he's in Pittsburgh, you're going to let Kawhi eat for free, right?
Oh yeah, he can come to our kitchen anytime, Jason.
Oh, okay, I'm just making sure. But no, all jokes aside, it is a little bit alarming that Middleton and Bledsoe both struggled mightily. But that just speaks to Milwaukee's depth because on the flip side, George Hill is playing major minutes and playing well. When Malcolm Brogdon's back, and he looks good off the bench. So that's why the Bucks have been winning, because they are 9 deep. They have an excellent rotation with Mirotic and Lopez and Giannis. So they're good. But if Middleton and Bledsoe don't step up, this could be Toronto's series to win. We were questioning Toronto's depth, but now that we've seen what they can do, now it's up to Bledsoe, Middleton, and most importantly, Giannis to answer the bell in Game 5.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I think you hit the nail on the head. We've watched this Toronto team really shift Kawhi onto Giannis, and they've made Giannis be a little bit more aggressive there in that matchup. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch as this series goes. They've felt comfortable switching him over, and we saw in Game 4 that let Chris Middleton get going. Without Kawhi guarding him, he scored 30 points. He was 11 of 15 from the floor, 4 for 7 from 3. That's going to be important for them. If Giannis can score on Kawhi Leonard and Middleton continues to give them that's going to make them a tough team to beat in this series and in general. So I think that's going to be very interesting. I mean, ultimately, though, Jason, I think what really this series is probably going to hinge on is the play of Eric Bledsoe, because he is the third guy for them, the guy they really need to get going. And so far in this series, he's been terrible. He has been a combined 9 for 38, Jason, from the floor, and a combined 2 for 17 in the first 3 games. Now, he was 2 for 7, so now at this point, he's looking at 11 for 45 from the floor and 2 for 19 from three-point land. So, I mean, that's just not good enough, Jason. I mean, let's just cut to the chase and say that's not good enough for them to win. They need more from him. They just gave him a big extension, and they need him to play up to that extension. He played great in the Boston series, and he propelled them to victory. And now they need him to do the same thing in this series. He's been good in the postseason. Whatever it is about the Raptors, their solid defense, whatever it may be, he needs to overcome that. He needs to improve his play, or Coach Budenholzer is going to have to go, as you mentioned, to George Hill even more.
Bledsoe has to step it up, and I think you can